Rain was hammering down so hard it felt like the sky was trying to punch holes in my yard. I was standing in my backyard, soaked, staring at a brand new drainage outlet as it blasted water into the grass like a fire hose. Blue and red police lights flashed through the sheets of rain next door, bouncing off wet fences and windows. And over all of it, I could hear my neighbor, Karen Leland, shrieking at the top of her lungs that I had weaponized rainwater to flood her basement on purpose. One of the officers was shouting over the storm, demanding to know why water was pouring across the property line. Karen was waving her phone in his face, recording everything, yelling that I had been stealing her water for months and that this was my final move. Watching that scene unfold, it was almost impossible to believe this all started days earlier, with her storming across my lawn in broad daylight, accusing my garden hose of lowering her water pressure. I tried to laugh it off. She called the police instead, even claimed I assaulted her with the hose. What she didn't realize was that every drop flooding her basement was legal, permitted, and forced by rules she demanded herself. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Before all of this blew up, my life in Ridgeway Glen was quiet in the best way possible. It's one of those small, planned communities tucked into rural Missouri where nothing much happens unless someone decides to make it happen. I moved there because I wanted peace. No drama, no noise. Just a clean house, a small yard, and a driveway big enough to work on my truck without bothering anyone. I'm not a party guy, I don't blast music, and I keep my place tighter than most because I've always believed that if you follow the rules, people leave you alone. My house sits slightly higher than the neighboring lots, with a sloped backyard and a concrete driveway that runs along the side. Everything drains naturally downhill, the way it was designed long before I ever showed up. I keep my lawn trimmed, my trash cans hidden, and my truck spotless. Washing it on Saturday mornings was my routine. Coffee in one hand, hose in the other, quiet street, no problems. That was before Karen Leland. Karen lived 2 houses down from me, and while she wasn't officially on the HOA board, she acted like she owned the place. She was always outside. Always watching. Always taking notes on her phone. If someone parked half an inch too close to the curb, she noticed. If a lawn went one day too long without mowing, she noticed. She had opinions about water usage, noise levels, fence colors, and how long you were allowed to idle your car. People joked about her, but nobody challenged her because dealing with Karen meant paperwork, complaints, and headaches. The first real confrontation happened on a warm Saturday morning. I was halfway through washing my truck, soap running down the tires, when I felt someone standing behind me. I turned around and saw Karen with her arms crossed, already fuming. She told me, very confidently, that her sprinklers had just lost pressure and that it was my fault. According to her, my hose was creating some kind of vacuum in the system and stealing municipal water from her house. I honestly thought she was joking. I laughed and told her that wasn't how water pressure worked. She didn't laugh back. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started recording me, narrating like I was committing a crime. She accused me of stealing public utilities, wasting water, and deliberately interfering with her landscaping schedule. I told her she was welcome to call the water company if she thought something was wrong. That's when she said she was calling the police. I assumed she was bluffing. She wasn't. About 15 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up, followed by another one shortly after. Officer Trent Lawson stepped out, already rubbing his temples like he knew exactly where this was going. He listened to Karen's story while she replayed her video, pointing at my hose like it was a weapon. Officer Lawson walked over to me, asked a few basic questions, and then did something Karen clearly wasn't expecting. He told her, calmly and clearly, that washing a vehicle with a garden hose was legal, that I wasn't stealing water, and that water pressure fluctuations happen all the time. No crime. No citation. End of story. Karen did not accept that. She argued with him, demanded he document the theft, and accused me of assault because the spray from the hose had splashed her shoes. Officer Lawson shut that down too, explaining that accidental splashing does not count as assault and that she was wasting police resources. Before leaving, he pulled me aside and quietly apologized. He admitted this wasn't the first time he'd been called out because of Karen, and it probably wouldn't be the last. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Within days, notices started showing up. Written complaints to the HOA, emails copied to city offices. Karen claimed my driveway runoff was contaminating her lawn. She accused me of illegally diverting water toward her property. She even claimed that soap residue posed an environmental hazard. Every complaint used official language and quoted ordinances she clearly spent hours researching. None of it made sense, but it didn't matter. Once the complaints were filed, they had to be reviewed. And that's when I realized this wasn't about water at all. Karen wasn't trying to solve a problem. She was trying to assert control, and she had just dragged the city, the HOA, and the rule book into my quiet little Saturday routine. Once Karen realized that calling the police hadn't scared me into submission, her approach shifted. She stopped pretending this was about water pressure and went all in on rules, codes, and technicalities. Every interaction after that felt less like a neighbor dispute and more like a slow-motion legal ambush. It started with emails. Long ones, the kind filled with highlighted sections of city ordinances, copied and pasted paragraphs, and bolded phrases like unauthorized discharge and nuisance runoff. According to Karen, any water that left my property and touched hers, even rainwater, was a violation. She claimed my driveway, my roof, and even the natural slope of my yard were all part of an illegal diversion system. A few days later, official-looking notices began showing up in my mailbox, warnings about drainage compliance. Requests for clarification. Nothing outright accusatory yet, but enough to make it clear the city was paying attention. Karen made sure I knew she was the reason. She knocked on my door one afternoon with a stack of printed statutes tucked under her arm, smiling like she just won something. She stood there pointing at sections of paper, explaining that she was documenting violations, and that if I didn't bring my property into full compliance, she would pursue civil action. She talked about lawsuits, liens, and forcing the HOA to intervene. She made it sound like she was doing me a favor by warning me first. I tried to stay calm. I told her I was happy to fix any real issue, but I needed to understand what she actually wanted. Her answer was simple and terrifying in its scope. She said no water from my property should ever reach hers, not from my driveway, not from my roof, not during storms. Ever. I asked her how that was even possible. She shrugged and said it wasn't her problem. That's when the stress really set in. Every time it rained, I caught myself watching where the water flowed. Every time I washed anything outside, I worried about being recorded. Karen seemed to appear out of nowhere whenever there was moisture involved, phone in hand, narrating again. Officer Lawson came back a second time after she called in another complaint, this one claiming I was intentionally directing water onto her lawn. He was clearly frustrated. He told me straight up that he thought the situation was ridiculous, but drainage complaints were one of those gray areas the city couldn't ignore once they were on record. He explained that even if Karen was being unreasonable, the city still had to investigate whether my property met drainage codes. His advice was blunt: document everything, stay calm, and don't give her anything she could twist into a violation. I tried reasoning with Karen one last time. I suggested meeting with the HOA together, or bringing in a city inspector so we could settle it properly. She refused. She wasn't interested in compromise or solutions. She wanted authority. She wanted to be the one who decided what was acceptable. By the end of that week, my quiet routine was gone. I was checking my mail with dread, watching the weather like it was an enemy, and realizing that Karen wasn't going to stop until she felt she had total control over my property. And somehow, she had convinced herself that the law was on her side. The city finally scheduled an inspection after Karen's complaints hit some internal threshold. The notice came in a plain envelope, neutral language, no accusations, just a date and a time. That alone told me something had shifted. This wasn't just neighbor drama anymore. It was officially on the city's radar. Marcus Hale showed up on a gray morning, clipboard in hand, work boots already muddy like he'd been doing this all day. He was polite, professional, and clearly tired in the way people get when they've seen the same kind of dispute play out too many times. He explained right away that once a drainage complaint is filed and documented, the city has to follow through. It doesn't matter if the neighbor is being unreasonable. The process still moves forward. He walked my property slowly, checking slopes, downspouts, and the way water naturally traveled across the ground. I followed him, answering questions, pointing things out. He confirmed what I already knew. My house was built higher than the surrounding lots, and everything drained downhill the way it was designed to. Nothing had been altered. Nothing had been redirected. Then he said something that stuck with me. He explained that the city doesn't expect homeowners to stop water entirely. That's impossible. What they expect is compliance at the point of discharge. As long as I released water within my own property line and followed approved methods, I was doing my part. Once water hit the ground, gravity took over. Surface runoff followed natural topography, and homeowners were not responsible for how rain behaved after that. He said it casually, like it was obvious. That's when I looked past him, over the fence, into Karen's backyard. I had seen her patio before, but never really looked at it. From my yard, it was clear now. The concrete slab sat noticeably lower than the surrounding soil, almost like a shallow bowl carved into the ground. There were no visible drains, no retaining wall, no elevation transition. It was sunken well below grade, and it sat directly downhill from my property. Marcus noticed where I was looking and followed my gaze. He didn't say much, but his expression changed just enough to tell me I wasn't imagining it. He asked if I knew when the patio had been built. I told him I didn't. He made a note on his clipboard. We walked the fence line together. He measured distances, checked setbacks, and explained that if I ever chose to upgrade my drainage, the key was placement. Discharge points needed to be several feet inside my property line. After that, the water was considered natural runoff. I asked him carefully what would happen if runoff flowed toward a lower neighboring property. He looked at me and said, plainly, that the city couldn't hold me responsible for someone else's grading choices or unpermitted construction. If a neighbor altered their land without proper drainage mitigation, that was on them. Karen watched the entire inspection from behind her sliding door, curtains twitching every time Marcus wrote something down. When he left, she came out immediately, demanding to know what he found. Marcus kept it professional. He told her the inspection was ongoing and that I would receive instructions if changes were required. She smiled like she'd already won. But I wasn't thinking about defending myself anymore. I wasn't thinking about explaining or arguing or trying to make her see reason. I was thinking about compliance. Exact, letter of the law compliance. That conversation flipped something in my head. Karen had spent weeks telling me what I couldn't do, what water wasn't allowed to touch, what rules had to be followed. And Marcus had just made it clear that if I followed those rules perfectly, the outcome might not look anything like Karen expected. I didn't need to stop water. I just needed to control where it left my property. For the first time since this started, I felt calm, not relieved. Focused. Karen wanted total containment. She wanted the rules enforced without exception. Fine. I stopped worrying about defending my routine and started planning how to follow her rules so precisely that she'd regret ever demanding them. Once the inspection was over and Marcus's words had time to settle in, I knew exactly what kind of help I needed. Not a handyman. Not someone who would try to keep things subtle or cheap. I needed someone who understood the rules and wasn't afraid to follow them so precisely that the result felt almost aggressive. That's how I ended up calling Dale Ironpipe Navarro. Dale came recommended by two neighbors outside the HOA who had both used him after disputes with inspectors and zoning boards. His reputation was simple. If the code allowed it, Dale would build it bigger, stronger, and more permanent than anyone expected. He also had zero patience for bullies who hid behind rulebooks. When Dale pulled into my driveway, he stepped out of his truck, looked around for about 10 seconds, and said, "Let me guess. Someone nearby thinks gravity is optional." I walked him through everything: the accusations, the complaints, the inspection, Karen's demand that no water ever touch her property. Dale didn't interrupt once. He just nodded, walked the yard, checked the slopes, and crouched near the fence line. When he stood back up, he smiled. "Oh yeah," he said, "we can make this beautiful. Fully legal. Overbuilt. No room for argument." We sat down and designed a drainage system that didn't just meet code, it exceeded it. Oversized commercial-grade gutters along the roofline. Reinforced downspouts. Everything pitched deliberately toward the back of my property, away from the driveway Karen had obsessed over. From there, all the runoff would feed into a buried pipe system, thick and heavy, designed to handle serious rainfall without backing up. The key piece was the discharge point. Dale explained that as long as the emitter sat several feet inside my property line, it was compliant. What happened after that was not my responsibility. The land sloped downhill. Water followed slope. End of discussion. We marked the exact spot. It was technically boring looking, just a patch of grass near the fence, but Dale treated it like the centerpiece of a sculpture. He talked about flow rates, pressure, soil saturation, and how quickly the system would respond during a storm. Every word reinforced what Marcus had already said. This wasn't a loophole. This was the system working exactly as designed. Before any work began, we took the plans to City Hall. Sharon Whitfield was working the permit counter that morning. She glanced at the drawings, then at me, then back at the drawings again. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not in concern but recognition. She asked a few technical questions, flipped through the pages, and nodded. "This is very thorough," she said. "You'd be surprised how many people try to cut corners on drainage." I told her why I was doing it. I didn't mention Karen by name, but Sharon figured it out anyway. She gave a small, knowing smile and said she'd seen similar complaints come across her desk more than once. She stamped the permit without hesitation and reminded me to use approved materials and keep the discharge point clear. When the construction started, it was impossible to miss. Dale's crew showed up early, loud, and efficient. Gutters came down. New ones went up, bigger and sturdier than anything else on the block. Trenches were dug. Pipes were laid. Everything was measured twice and documented. It looked serious, because it was. Karen noticed immediately. She came outside the first morning, arms crossed, watching every move like a supervisor. When she finally walked over, she wasn't angry. She was pleased. She asked Dale what they were doing, and he cheerfully explained that we were upgrading the drainage system to ensure full compliance. Her smile widened. She told me she was glad I had finally come to my senses. She reminded me that she'd be monitoring the results closely and that she expected the problem to be resolved permanently. I nodded. I told her the driveway would stay dry. I told her the system was designed to handle everything. I didn't lie. I just didn't explain what that actually meant. As the days passed, she grew more confident. She waved to me instead of glaring. She even told another neighbor that she had forced a major correction and that things would be quieter now. Meanwhile, Dale finished the system exactly as planned. Heavy-duty pipes. Clean connections. A discreet emitter sitting quietly inside my property, waiting. When it was done, I didn't test it. I didn't turn on a hose. I didn't run a single drop of water through it manually. I was waiting for the sky to do that for me. And Karen, standing on her sunken patio, had no idea that the solution she demanded was already locked in place, just waiting for the first real storm to arrive. By the time the work entered its second week, the entire street knew something serious was happening in my yard. Trenches cut across the grass, ladders leaned against the house, and stacks of new materials sat neatly arranged near the driveway. It wasn't messy, but it was loud. Metal clanged. Power tools whined. Trucks came and went early in the morning. Every sound felt amplified because Karen was watching for any excuse to object. She found one by the third day. Mid-morning, while Dale's crew was bolting down a new gutter run, a patrol car rolled up again. Officer Trent Lawson stepped out, already shaking his head. He didn't even bother asking what was going on. Karen was already on her porch, phone raised, narrating about illegal construction noise and harassment through sound. Officer Lawson walked straight past her and over to me. He asked to see the permit. I handed him the laminated copy Dale insisted I keep on me at all times. He glanced at it, nodded, and then walked back toward Karen. I couldn't hear everything he said over the tools, but I caught enough. Permitted work. Allowed hours. No violation. He told her, again, that calling the police didn't give her veto power over legal construction. She tried to argue. He cut her off. When he left, he gave me an apologetic look that said this wouldn't be the last time. She tried again 2 days later. Same result. Each time, Officer Lawson grew less patient and more direct. Each time, Karen grew quieter, more tense, like someone watching a plan slip out of their hands. By the end of the week, the system was finished. It looked almost boring once everything was backfilled and cleaned up. The gutters blended into the house. The pipes were hidden underground. The only visible sign was the small, low-profile emitter near the back fence, sitting several feet inside my property line, exactly where the plan said it should be. Karen came over that afternoon, inspecting from a distance. She asked if it was done. I said yes. She asked if I'd tested it. I said no. She frowned and told me I should run water through it to make sure it worked. I smiled and told her I wasn't worried. It was built to code. It would handle whatever it needed to handle. What I didn't tell her was that I wasn't interested in controlled tests. I wasn't interested in hoses or sprinklers or anything that could be dismissed as artificial. I was waiting for something no one could argue with: rain. The forecast had been on my mind all week. A slow-moving storm system was forming, the kind meteorologists love to hype because it lingers. Multiple days of steady rain, heavy bursts, saturated ground. Exactly the conditions drainage systems are designed for. The night before the storm was supposed to arrive, I prepared quietly. I organized every document I had into a single folder. Permit approvals, inspection notes, printed ordinances, email chains, photos of the system during construction. I mounted a small camera facing the backyard, not hidden, just visible enough to show I wasn't doing anything secretly. I wanted proof. Clean, boring proof. Karen prepared too, in her own way. That afternoon, a courier dropped off an envelope at my door. Thick paper, formal letterhead. Inside was a cease and desist letter demanding I immediately stop all actions that resulted in water entering her property. It was signed by her nephew, whose title was listed prominently beneath his name. Paralegal, not a lawyer, not a lawyer. The letter was full of dramatic language, claims of intentional harm, threats of legal escalation, demands for immediate compliance. It read like it was meant to scare me into undoing everything I had just built. I read it once. Then I placed it neatly into the folder with everything else. I didn't respond. That silence seemed to unnerve Karen more than anything else I'd done. She hovered near the fence that evening, glancing toward the emitter, then back toward her patio. She paced. She checked the sky. She refreshed the weather app on her phone over and over again. The next morning, the clouds rolled in early. The air felt heavy, the kind of stillness that comes right before something breaks. Karen stood on her patio as the first drops fell, arms crossed, watching my yard like she expected something dramatic to happen immediately. Nothing did. The ground absorbed the rain. The system stayed quiet. For a while, it looked like she might be right. I stayed inside, watching the forecast tick forward, listening as the rain intensified. I didn't touch anything. I didn't adjust a thing. I just waited, because I knew that when the soil finally reached its limit, when the ground could take no more, the system would do exactly what it was designed to do. And when that happened, there would be no arguing with it. Karen had demanded perfection. She had demanded absolute compliance. She had demanded that the rules be enforced without exception. All I had done was agree with her. Now, all that was left was to see how well she understood the consequences of that demand once the storm truly arrived. The storm didn't ease in. It arrived like it had been holding a grudge. Rain slammed into the roof in thick, relentless sheets, loud enough to drown out everything else. Within minutes, the ground outside went from darkened soil to slick mud, the kind that squelches under your boots. From inside the house, I watched water run down the windows in twisting streams, the sky a flat, angry gray that promised it wasn't done yet. At first, nothing dramatic happened. The lawn absorbed what it could. Puddles formed and disappeared. The drainage system stayed silent, just like Karen probably hoped it would. I checked the camera feed and the forecast. More rain was coming, a lot more. Then the ground hit its limit. I heard a dull, hollow thump from the backyard, followed by a sudden rush. On the camera, the emitter cap lifted and released a powerful surge of water into the grass. It wasn't spraying wildly or shooting sideways. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do, sending water safely onto my property at a controlled point. For a few seconds, the grass handled it. Then the saturated soil gave up. Water spread outward, slow at first, then faster, following the natural slope of the land. It crept toward the fence, slipped underneath, and crossed the property line without any help from me. Gravity took over, just like Marcus had said it would. From my window, I could see Karen's patio begin to change. What had always looked like a cozy sunken space started acting like a bowl. Water collected along the edges, then pooled in the center. The small drain in the concrete couldn't keep up. The level rose inch by inch, turning her patio into a shallow pond. I didn't need the camera to tell me what came next. Karen burst out her back door, screaming into the rain, slipping as she tried to push water away with a broom like she could force it uphill. The water reached the threshold of her sliding door and pushed against it. When it finally gave, the rush carried straight into her finished basement. She vanished inside, only to reappear moments later, soaked and panicked, yelling into her phone. Police lights appeared not long after, flashing wildly through the storm. Officer Lawson stepped out of his car, clearly angry, rain plastering his uniform to his shoulders. Karen was hysterical, pointing at my yard, shouting that I had flooded her house on purpose. He came straight to me, voice raised over the rain, demanding to know why water was pouring toward her property. I handed him the folder without a word. Inside were the permits, the inspection notes, the approved plans, photos of the emitter placement, and the video from weeks earlier of Karen standing in my driveway, demanding total containment and threatening legal action if a single drop crossed the line. Officer Lawson's expression changed as he flipped through the pages. His anger drained into something closer to disbelief. Marcus arrived shortly after, called in because of the drainage complaint. He inspected the system in the rain, measured the discharge point, and confirmed everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. He then walked over to Karen's patio, looked at the pooling water, and frowned. He asked her when the patio had been built. She didn't answer. He told her the truth instead. The patio was unpermitted. It sat below grade with no adequate drainage mitigation. The flooding wasn't caused by my system. It was caused by her own construction choices. Officer Lawson made it official. No citation for me. No order to change anything. He told Karen this was a civil issue tied to weather and unpermitted work. The rain kept falling as they left. Karen stood there in silence, water pouring out of her basement windows, the rules she had weaponized finally turning against her. And there was nothing anyone could do to help her now. The storm finally moved on sometime overnight, leaving the neighborhood soaked and quiet in that heavy, exhausted way that only comes after hours of relentless rain. By morning, the street looked normal again. Puddles everywhere, damp lawns, overcast sky. The only real sign that anything unusual had happened was the steady hum coming from Karen's house, a shop vacuum. Then another. Then silence. Then the sound again. A few days later, an insurance adjuster showed up. I noticed his car first, parked in Karen's driveway with a clipboard resting on the dashboard. He spent a long time walking around her backyard, taking photos, measuring the patio, checking the waterline stains that marked how high the flooding had reached. From my side of the fence, I could hear muffled voices, Karen talking fast, emotional, trying to control the narrative. Later that afternoon, he knocked on my door. He introduced himself politely and explained that Karen had filed a claim stating her basement had been intentionally flooded due to a neighbor's actions. He asked if I would be willing to answer a few questions. I told him yes, and I didn't even have to think about it. I brought out the folder. Permits, approved plans, inspection notes, emails, photos from the build, video clips, the cease and desist letter, the footage of Karen demanding that no water from my property ever touch hers. I laid it all out calmly, one piece at a time, and explained exactly why the drainage system had been installed in the first place. The adjuster listened carefully. He asked thoughtful questions. He took notes. At one point, he paused, looked up, and asked a single question that told me everything I needed to know. Was her patio permitted? I told him I didn't know for sure, but the city inspector had flagged it as unpermitted during the storm. That was the moment his posture changed, not dramatically, just subtly, like a puzzle piece snapping into place. He thanked me for my time and went back next door. I didn't hear anything official for a while, but the signs were there. Contractors came and went from Karen's house. Bands ran day and night. Sections of drywall were carried out and tossed into dumpsters. The shop vac noise became part of the background, especially whenever clouds rolled in. Then, one afternoon, I saw Karen standing in her driveway, holding a stack of papers and staring at them like she didn't quite believe what they said. She looked smaller somehow, less certain. Later, I found out through a neighbor what happened. Her insurance claim had been denied. The reason was simple and devastating. The flooding was classified as a result of unpermitted construction and a failure to mitigate known drainage risks. The adjuster's report cited her altered grading, the lack of proper drainage on the patio, and the documented history showing she had forced the very changes she now blamed for the damage. In other words, the damage was considered self-inflicted. Karen was on the hook for everything: cleanup, repairs, mold prevention, structural inspection. It added up quickly, and none of it was covered. After that, she changed. She stopped standing outside with her phone. She stopped walking the street like she owned it. Within weeks, a line of tall hedges appeared along the fence between our properties. They weren't decorative. They were defensive. A wall built to hide, not to beautify. She avoided eye contact whenever we crossed paths. If I was outside, she stayed inside. If I pulled into my driveway, she waited until I was gone before stepping out. We never spoke again. The HOA shifted quietly too. No announcements, no apologies. But the tone of their emails changed. Complaint procedures were updated. Language about neighbor disputes and good faith resolution suddenly appeared. Drainage complaints required inspections before action. Anonymous accusations were no longer enough. Things went back to normal. Saturday mornings returned to being quiet. Rain became just rain again. I stopped checking the weather with dread. I stopped watching where every drop flowed. The system sat there, buried and boring, doing its job without drama. Sometimes, when a storm rolls in, I still hear that shop vacuum next door kick on. I don't smile about it. I don't feel triumphant. I just feel calm. Karen wanted control. She wanted rules enforced without exception. She wanted the world to bend to her demands. In the end, the rules didn't bend at all. They simply worked exactly as written. And once they did, peace came back to the neighborhood all on its own. After everything settled, I had a lot of time to think about how something so small turned into something so destructive. Rules exist for a reason. They're supposed to keep neighborhoods fair, safe, and predictable. But when the wrong person gets obsessed with them, rules stop being protections and start becoming weapons. They stop being about community and turn into tools for control. Karen didn't lose because I fought her or tried to get revenge. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't break a rule, and I didn't do anything sneaky. She lost because she demanded perfection from a system that was never meant to be perfect. She wanted every drop of water controlled, contained, and obedient. She ignored reality, ignored common sense, and ignored the simple truth that you can't argue with gravity. Water doesn't care about intentions. It doesn't care about complaints, threats, or printed statutes. It follows the land. It follows physics. And once the rules were applied exactly as written, the outcome was inevitable. Now, when storms roll through Ridgeway Glen, I sit out on my deck with a cup of coffee and listen. I hear rain hit the roof, rush through the gutters, and drain away quietly beneath the yard. No shouting, no police lights, no accusations, just the sound of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. The neighborhood feels calm again, ordinary, and that's how I like it. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?